this version of Superman is a little darker. I think the reason that is because this is his origin story. If he starts out as the upbeat, hopeful, optimistic character and he ends there, you get exactly what you got with the James Gunn Superman, where he doesn't truly change as a character.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our co-host, Andrew, to review a earlier iteration of Superman known as Man of Steel. That's right, that's the Zack Snyder take on Superman, which was, the story was by David S. Goyer and our very own favorite storyteller, Christopher Nolan, with the screenplay by David S. Goyer as well. And of course, as I just mentioned, it's directed by Zack Snyder. So, getting right into our overall impressions, what are those hot thoughts from Andrew? And your rating, of course, is always appreciated.
Yeah, I think this is the best iteration of Superman we've ever gotten in live action. That is my hot take. As far as my rating, I give it just a flat 6.0.
Okay. Here we are coming back head to head on our ratings. I had a 6.15.
That's actually crazy.
Yeah. I wonder where we had that small discrepancy. I don't know.
I mean, to be fair, I had a 6.05, but I went the 0.05 just doesn't sound as good, but
yeah. 6.1, 6.0, whatevs. What I was really taken away from this is there are a couple small inconsistencies with things in this world that just added more questions than answers. But for the most part, this is a very cohesive story and is told in a way which is very enjoyable, right? Not exactly surprising in my opinion because of my constant praise of Christopher Nolan, but we'll go dive into why. And if you disagree, feel free to leave us a comment or all of that good stuff. But we're going to get right into it. If you are unfamiliar with Man of Steel, Andrew, you want to tell the audience what Man of Steel is all about?
Sure. Man of Steel follows the origin story of Clark Kent, Superman, Kal-El, whatever you want to call him. The film picks up all the way back on Krypton. I think you spend like a solid 10 to 15 minutes just exploring that part of his story, and it focuses on Jor-El, his mother Lara, and Zod, as well as the leadership, and shows how the planet collapsed in on itself, as well as Superman getting sent to Earth. The rest of the film jumps right back to the current day with Clark Kent kind of wandering the world searching for a purpose as and then throughout that he's shown flashbacks with his dad, his earthly father, Jonathan Kent, and kind of discussing what his role is and when he ought to reveal himself to the world, and is the world ready for him. He ultimately does find a Kryptonian scout ship, meets his real dad, Jor-El, or rather a AI version of him, I guess is the best way to put it. Has a conversation with him, takes on the mantle of Superman, and in doing so, alerts Zod to his presence on Earth. And then Zod shows up and wants to rebuild Krypton on Earth, and thus their conflict is born. Zod wanting to terraform Earth and turn it into the new Krypton, and Superman wanting to create a world for both peoples to live in harmony.
And that's the climactic fight you get, as you always do in a superhero film. That's what happens at the end of this one. Not surprising, but let's get into the nitty gritty. So if you haven't watched it at this point, what are you doing? But if you don't want spoilers, then you're going to have to watch it yourself before you come back to this. Otherwise, we're going to plow on right ahead as we always do, starting off with that opening scene. Andrew, what was your impression of Krypton, the creation of the this being that then gets sent off to Earth in a desperate attempt to have some remnant of the Kryptonians to survive from their explosion of their planet? What was your thoughts on that opening scene?
I really like this opener. I think as far as superhero openers, it is very different. just because most of them you're opening up with the character themselves. This one's opening up with his people, and as the movie progresses, you'll find out this is very, very relevant to the rest of the film. Like it is essentially what the rest of the film is built upon. The story of the Kryptonian people and their survivors, as Superman is not the only one on accident, really. Um, but yeah, I like the character of Jor-El. I really like the character of Zod. They're both introduced in a very efficient and effective manner. Like it's not a super long sequence, but they cover a lot of ground in there, and they give both characters a lot of depth in that time span.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though you don't even see Superman in the first 10 minutes other than being in his baby form, right? It
Yeah,
provides all the background you need to understand these people and understand where they're coming from and why this struggle that you get later on in the film is so critical, right? And so that's it really establishes things really well. Yeah, there's so many great things to say. It's also just inherently interesting to see this planet dying before your eyes, which you don't normally see in a story. And so the fact that it starts off with it in such a drastic form where the planet is literally blowing up is really interesting. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The only thing I'll add is this didn't take away anything from this part of the rating, but this is where you first get the inklings of things that don't exactly make sense, and they're not big things. It's my one really small pet peeve that just kept coming back was, for example, if Zod wants the Codex and his father Jor-El is running away with it, why are they shooting at him and trying to blow him up if they need what he has in his hands? So, small things like that I was like not sure why that's going on there, but for the most part, pretty good. Also, wasn't entirely clear to me why no one else from the planet tried to escape, why it was purely just the baby they launch off, and then the bad guys who they send to prison end up living. But then no one else even attempted to just run away, and they all just said, all right, no, let's just all die with the planet. Didn't really make sense to me, but whatever. We're gonna accept it. If you accept that premise, I think the rest of the film goes relatively smoothly. So that's most of what I have to say. I don't know if you want to push back on that, or if you have any lore stuff that I'm not unfamiliar with that would be valuable as a background here. That's also welcome.
I mean, I think the idea with and they kind of discuss this in the beginning of the film is the rest of the Kryptonians don't really believe that Jor-El is right and that their planet is collapsing in the way that he says it does. They don't have the same level of urgency. Um, and then secondarily, they even talk to him when he tells them it's we need to make sure that our race can survive. They tell him we couldn't even do that if we wanted to. Basically, like we'd be going to our deaths if we just left our planet. Where would we go? And his suggestion is the outpost they have, to which again they just say they in their minds it is safer to stay on planet than to leave. And then I think the idea is right. By the time they finally realize he was correct about the state of the core of their planet, it's too late for them to do anything anyways.
Sure. And I guess maybe just to add on to that, the idea that taking the Codex, which was somewhat of a sacred element of their society, which might be necessary for the survival of their species, away from the planet might be considered a serious faux pas. So uh, I'm not going to get caught up in it, right? I still enjoyed the movie. Obviously, I gave it a 6.1, but it still kind of sticks in my mind as questionable, but I think it's enough benefit of a doubt to buy the premise going forward. So, anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about the main character now that he's escaped Krypton and is on Earth and starts to grow up as this kid who's discovering his powers and discovers that there's so much to focus on in the world and has these issues with seeing everything, and everything is almost too stimulating, if you will. And he's trying to figure out how to hone his senses so he can figure out where he's at and focus on what's important. What were your thoughts on Superman as a character, how he starts, how he develops in this film, all that good stuff?
Well, I mean, I said it earlier. I think this is the best version of Superman we've got, and so um, I really like his character in this movie. I think the main gripe that people have isn't that they'll claim this movie is bad, and the premise upon which they build their argument is that this is not the Superman they know and love. I'd push back against that in two ways. One, I don't think that Superman being different than the Superman you're familiar with makes this a bad film. I think you can have a good film even if you do change a character, the gripe I have is when you change a character for like optics reasons, like you want to swap their gender or their race, or you want to just like give them extra stuff in their backstory, like they did in How to Train Your Dragon, the live action one, without like adding to the character all that much. You're literally just adding details. You're not adding depth. Um, so I like some of the changes. The second way I'd push back is I don't think this Superman is as different as people would like you to believe. What are the core traits of Superman, right? He is supposed to be someone who cares about human life. He does that in this film. He is supposed to be upbeat and want to. He's supposed to be like a contrast to Batman in that sense. In that regard, I will agree. This version of Superman is a little darker. I think the reason that is because this is right his origin story. If he starts out as the upbeat, hopeful, optimistic character and he ends there, you get exactly what you got with the James Gunn Superman, where he doesn't truly change as a character. And now you can look at the rest of the DCEU and say he's still dark and brooding for the rest of it. I think the rest of the DCEU is a trash fire, to be completely honest with you. And I don't think Man of Steel ought to suffer because of it. I think Man of Steel, in and of itself, is a wonderful iteration of Superman. You have a compelling character with flaws and very real struggles in a world that's meant to be almost like the best way to put it is like a post 9/11 world. When you look at the Superman movie that was put out with Christopher Reeves, from my understanding, that came out before 9/11, before you had a surveillance state, before you had massive distrust in government and powerful entities. Now, post 9/11, you have a very distrusting world. And so this is the first Superman movie we get post that. And the way that it's reflected in the movie, I think it's very compelling. Um, and not only that, you just have this duality within him, right? Because dad is constantly telling him, I know based on how powerful you are, you will change the world, but you just have to wait. You cannot just go saving everybody on a whim right now, which people don't like. I guess they're entitled to their opinion. I think it still makes for a compelling story.
Yeah, and we'll get to Jonathan Kent at some point in this review because I think it definitely plays a lot into the Superman that we see in this version of him, but definitely for Superman himself. Now, to provide the contrast that we're getting, right? This is right on the heels of the new Superman being released, so that's why we thought it was apt to give this review now. And in that version, you see things such as that version of Superman is very careful to not just try to save humanity, right, and human life, but he also has a sense in which he's trying to save all types of destruction, right? You see that when they have the giant amalgam beast trying to kill everyone in the middle of Metropolis, and he's stopping it from even interacting with the buildings around it, right? Or saving squirrels and things like that. And there's a lot more effort to maybe stop wanton destruction, right? Whereas in this one, you see a lot more Superman who is even utilizing the structures around him to help fight his enemies, right? And there's not maybe a focus on saving every person in the world like you see what's happening in this new Superman, which just came out. What are your thoughts on that dynamic? Does that make him less of a Superman because he doesn't carry out those same types of holistic saving that you see in the new version?
So here's the thing, and this is where the two films I think come into contrast the most. Superman in this film is posed with the question almost, what is the cost of doing good? You are
Mm-hmm.
going to be shunned by some. Not everyone is going to accept you. There's going to be a cost, and he has to deal with that cost. In the new
Sure.
Superman, he just saves the most amount of lives possible, which results in the conflict you have at the beginning. The problem with the new one is that never pans out in a way that actually adds to his character development because he was right in doing so all along. So there isn't really a quote unquote cost for him other than he saved the day again. Whereas with this Superman, he isn't just blindly always doing good as he's growing up. He is having and he does have this like base instinct almost to save people, right? You see that in the bus scene. You see this in other scenes too, like with the oil rig. He wants to save people, But his dad is constantly telling him, you can't just go around saving everybody because these people are going to be terrified of you. And he like references the kid and his mom in their house. Like, look at how they're reacting right now. This is just two people. Imagine what the world's going
Hmm.
to do when they realize there is, in his words, like there's a literal god among us, pretty much. And I mean, the name Superman is pretty telling. And you see that too when he reveals himself to the world. You've got the entirety of the U.S. military's best pointing their guns down at him, taking him into custody. They're exhausting every option they have to try and control him. Um, and then you have the scene when he's locked up and he like says, "Let's put all our cards on the table," and breaks his um, wrists and or the why am I forgetting the
The
word right
chains,
now?
yeah, the
Uh,
shackles.
yeah, and he's just like, "You can't control me, and you're gonna have to be okay
Hmm.
with that. I am here to help."
Hmm.
And then that movie's about him proving that. And there are scenes throughout the movie too where the U.S. troops are just kind of like, especially when in that one fight scene in that like Kansas like street main street or whatever. They're like, he's one of our allies. And even at the end of the movie, they're still sending surveillance drones to try and find him. So
Hmm.
he's still having to deal with that.
Yeah, and I think that that distrust you see to a certain degree in the new version of Superman as well. The difference is that you see the clear buildup and the explanation of that in this one, versus in the new version, you see that there's a he's already established and the government already distrusts him. And I guess that was one of the issues back in that last review that I wish they would have explored more, rather than just having this very aggressive anti-Superman sentiment from the start. It would have been nice to have some sort of explanation for that. So yeah, I definitely agree and see what you're saying in regards to this version of Superman. Is it adds a lot to have that backstory and to have that build up for this character to manifest himself as Superman in this film.
Yeah.
It was done very well.
And I
What do
think
you?
the other
No, go
thing
ahead.
in comparison with like the new film is he's been Superman for 3 years. You'd think he'd go either one of two ways. Either at this point, one, they'd be very trusting of him because for 3 years he's been going around doing nothing but save lives. Or two, they'd be actively hunting him down because even though he is doing
Mhm.
good, they don't trust him. We don't get any sort of sense of development from especially the individuals in, say, that like briefing room, those top government officials in terms of a development of this situation. It just feels like, oh, Superman's on the back of our minds, whatever sort of thing.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it just felt like there needed to be tension, so they just put tension there rather than building it up like this movie does.
Mhm. Yeah, it's totally totally fair. What are your thoughts on the villains in this film? You have this whole build up where Superman is trying to figure out who he is and what his powers are, and then of course the aliens from his home world of Krypton, Zod and his goons decide to arrive at Earth and say hand over Superman. What are your thoughts on General Zod, on his introduction to Earth and his development in this film as the antagonist?
I think Zod is so good. Um, I was watching the old Superman with Zod, it's Superman 2. It's funny at parts, but Zod is not nearly as compelling as he is in this film. And I
Hmm.
think the thing that makes Zod compelling is that he also has his own moral code he's trying to uphold, and I would say he also ties into one of the main themes in this film, which is the idea of like free will being versus like being destined to do something, which is it's not a they don't talk about it a ton, except around characters like Zod, and especially at the beginning when they talk about the idea of like they had engineered births, pretty much, where each Kryptonian would be destined to fulfill a certain role before even being born, and how
Hmm.
Jor-El sees Kal-El's birth as this is someone who they can choose who they're going to be. And that's a big part of Kal-El's story in this film is who is he going to be? How is he going to bridge this gap between two peoples? Whereas Zod was bred to be a soldier. He was bred to protect Krypton at all costs. And he doesn't care if that means perpetuating a genocide of an entire other species, as long as it means um, allowing Krypton's race to continue. And
Hmm.
so it's not he's not like the villain where it's just like, oh, I'm evil, I'm bad, I want to fight Superman kind of thing. Um, like that's very much Lex Luthor's whole thing is I just hate
Right.
Superman. Whereas Zod is more he doesn't hate Superman. Matter of fact, when he first meets him, he asks him to join him. He wants his help. He respects
Hmm.
his dad, and he talks about that earlier on. How like it still haunts me to this day that I had to kill your father. Um, and so I think it adds a lot of depth to his character. I think it's similar almost to how like Thanos was the villain in the MCU that saw what he was doing as an ultimately good thing, even though if many people looked at it as like this is terrible. But it was something he was willing like he had come to terms like I understand what you guys are going to think of this, but I have decided this is what needs to happen, and that's kind of the character that Zod is.
Yeah, and that's once again what I think makes him so great. I recalled the first time watching Man of Steel feeling like he was a bit arrogant and stock. And as I watched him more in this film, I realized it's simply not the case. It was just he has such a strong, pragmatic, and utilitarian outlook to the world, combined with a strong splash of arrogance that makes him the character that he is. And so he's not afraid to espouse his ideology and say, this is what needs to happen, and I'm willing to do it at all costs. And it flowed in a somewhat natural form for him, where he goes, yeah, I'm about to commit a genocide, but that's what I have to do for my people, and that's the right thing to do.
Yeah,
And it definitely catalyzes Superman in a way that feels like, oh, I think maybe watching it initially, that was where my hiccup was this idea that, well, he's just so clearly such an evil guy. But if you look at it in the background of the Codex and how they were raised to be a specific way, the idea that he was bred from birth to have this idea that Krypton is first, he would come to this planet with that same ideology and espouse it to other Kryptonians, assuming, of course, you would believe this is the right thing to do because this is how you were bred as well, right? When in fact, Superman is an outlier in that because he was a natural birth compared to coming from the Codex algorithm that genetically demanded certain things of him.
yeah.
So, great character, really provides a strong um, opposing force, if you will, in this film. And there, yeah, I think it is interesting. I know I'm always espousing Red Rising as a great series, but one of the things I liked about just the crypto, there was a small splash of that, I thought, in this, in that they are a warrior people that have come to conquer Earth, but they espouse their ideology. And that's something that's always being done in that series, where they're going back and forth about not just we are at war, but we are at war for the right reasons. And each of us is bred to not just do this, but we do it for what we believe is right. And this is why, right? And so I always love those discussions being thrown into it in a natural way, and I thought that they did that fairly organically in this film.
Yeah. I
So it
think
was a great
also
feeding ground for that discussion.
I think also one of the really interesting things about his character when it comes to the like almost the predestination of his being from birth is the idea that like he perpetuates a coup at the beginning of the film, and you could read into it a little bit, and I don't think you need to too much, but it's like the leaders there are also made to fulfill certain roles. Zod wants the same thing as them, but he just gets fed up. And so, even though he's made as a servant of Krypton, he doesn't see the government as the extension of its people. And he decides, you no longer are properly representing the people. It is my duty to dethrone you. It's not about power for him. It's still every action he takes in this movie, which is one of the reasons he's such a good character. He's consistent and it flows naturally from his character. But every action he takes is in his mind for the good of Krypton.
Right. Even when he's even going back to his whole thing with Jor-El, Superman's dad, he's talking to him saying, "You should join me. You know, what I'm doing is for the good of Krypton. It's definitely to save our people." And there's a sense in which Jor-El sees that he just has more of a strong moral compass and says, like, this is the wrong way to do things. And so there's disagreements on how that ought to be carried out. But at the end of the day, he sees that there is still good reason for why he's taking the path that he's taking, and there's merit to it. And so once again, that flows into his discussion with Superman, where he goes, I regret having to have taken that path because I saw your father as a man who was clearly on the right path, right? He knew what was the right thing to do. He just took, in Zod's mind, the wrong actions to do it. So yeah, great character. I think he adds a lot. I don't know that his goons add that much. The one girl espouses some ideas about them being the superior race and goes very much Nazi-esque in regards to her viewpoint. But other than that, she doesn't add a lot to the film. It's mostly Zod that really adds the creme de la creme in the antagonism here, unless you have
Yeah.
other thoughts on them.
I mean, I thought her fight with Superman was interesting, as like when you refer to the dialogue. The rest of the goons don't really have any dialogue. They're literally just there to represent the being that is the only survivors of this race. Um, so I mean, they don't like. I wouldn't even consider them side characters, to be honest, other than the girl. And I think she's just meant to kind of counter Superman in that, like to draw out and show, right, he does care about people, because this movie does have a darker feel. I'm not even going to deny that. Like, it's the colors are darker,
Mm-hmm.
the way that it's shot is darker, in the nature of it. It's a much more serious, like, weight to like the way the movie wants you to feel as you're watching it. um I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. So all that to say, I think that she's just meant to still show that, like, Superman is still Superman, and that he still cares about lives, even though he's not like saving every squirrel on the street that might get trampled by a beast.
Right.
And
Totally.
right, I think there's also a ton to be said for the fact that, like, he is just now getting to use the full range of his powers. He'd never flown before, so that's a massive thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then also he hadn't been saving people in the sense that, like, on like a global scale, right? You get the impression he's been
Mm-hmm.
saving people here and there,
Mm-hmm.
whenever he finds the opportunity to do so while going unnoticed. But he's still figuring out what it means to be a superhero. And right as he's beginning to do so, this world-ending threat shows up. And so it's a lot for this character to balance after just finding out, oh, this is my history. This is where I'm actually from. This is why my dad sent me here. This is
Mm-hmm.
what and he's like still trying to decide, what is my role in this world? Am I supposed to be the person that saves them? Like there's so many questions he has to internally struggle with, which is why I am totally okay with the way that he handles things in this movie. Can't say the same for the rest of the DCEU films.
Sure. Yeah, and that's also one of the reasons I had some leniency for his altruism in comparison to the newer Superman is as someone who's just learning his powers and just figuring out how things work, it makes sense there would be some level of quote unquote hiccups along the way, right? Cities will be leveled to some degree or another, and he doesn't necessarily know, okay, or cognitively in the middle of the fight think, oh, I need to not throw them through that building because there might be people inside, right?
Yeah,
Or the idea that also I just respected the idea that he can't be everywhere all at once. And so while he's fighting one element of the Kryptonians on one side of the planet, the other side is still doing wanton destruction. People are dying, cities are collapsing, and that's just not something you can realistically stop everything all at once.
yeah.
Versus you don't get the impression that that's really a barrier for the new Superman, where he pretty much is able to be present anytime there is some sort of drastic measures being taken by the enemies.
And when he can't, he sends his friends, who weren't his friends until that moment.
Exactly. The Justice Gang.
So
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on as the story develops? He then goes to his mom, who gives him the pep talk, and then he goes off to fight General Zod, has that full on smash down, destroys many of his components until all of his other forces are gone. And then they have that mono fight, right? All builds to that climactic final scene where he decides he has to end up fighting General Zod and taking the life of his enemy. What were your thoughts on the full development and completion of this film?
I liked their fight at the end for two reasons. One, I think it's really good for Zod, and two, I think it's really good for Superman. I think for Zod, he his plan has not only been destroyed, but his purpose does not exist any longer. He was bred to protect Krypton, and Krypton no longer exists outside for Kal-El, and he sees Kal-El as an enemy of Krypton. So what is he meant to do with this? He goes on a rampage. He's like, I am a man without purpose with the powers of a god. What do I do with this? I make the man who destroyed my purpose. I think he refers to it as his soul. He took my soul. I destroy that man and everything he cares about. And so again, it's a natural outflowing of this character that totally makes sense for him. I will also say, I think the idea, right, of someone bred for a purpose, and then the question of what happens when you take that purpose away is a very interesting
Mm-hmm.
one. You see this in Star Wars with all the clones. There are multiple times they ask the questions of like, what do we do after war? We are bred for nothing but combat. So what
Mm-hmm.
becomes our purpose outside of this? And I think that Superman just, or Zod's character is a very real outflowing of what happens to a character who doesn't just lose their purpose. He had it ripped from his grasp. And there's like that
Mm-hmm.
moment when he's in the scout ship and he's basically begging Superman not to destroy the ship. And that's when Superman's just like, Krypton had its chance. I can't he makes the decision, right? Because for the most of the movie, he wants Krypton and Earth to live in harmony together. And
Mm-hmm.
as the story progresses, he comes to the conclusion Krypton can't live in unison with Earth. It would just result
Mm-hmm.
in humans dying. And so in his mind, Krypton has had its chance. The Genesis Chamber, those aren't like people in his mind, and the rest of the Kryptonians are enemies. And that leaves him with Zod. And I still think at the end of the day, right, you get a very Superman type reaction from this where he doesn't want to kill Zod. I will clarify,
Mm-hmm.
there's no instance in the movie where Superman kills somebody. Somebody might die and Superman not save them. That's different from him actively ending a life. And so even though Zod is his enemy, it is this massive struggle for him in the moment to end his life, and he only does so because he sees no other option.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
And you
here's
can
the
see
thing.
how agonizing that is for him too.
Yeah, I think Henry Cavill does a great job of showing that. I think what future movies should have looked like is this being a defining moment for him, where now he does everything in his power to prevent having to take that course of action. Because this haunts him. He had to kill the last of his species. He is now, in his, as far as he knows, truly alone in this universe when it comes to there being other Kryptonians out there.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think it plays it out well, right? He has that discussion with his mom, and it's backgrounded with his whole experience with his father and his father's death, and all this idea of when is it the right time and who should I be saving in this instance. And it's very good for his character development. And I don't even know if this is a huge beef because it didn't take a lot from, once again, my rating, but the idea that at the end of the day, all of his change had really, for the most part, already happened by the time that General Zod lands on Earth, in that he has this whole arc of struggling with who he is and what he should be doing, but a lot of that was in his past, right? And you only get that because the flashbacks are staggered throughout the film, and you see that he was at first, he was not sure what to do as a child, and then he learns not to fight people as he gets older, and then all of these other things until he becomes an adult and learns to save people in a piecemeal fashion until I guess he fully manifests as saving the world when General Zod arrives. But that's like the pinnacle, I guess, of his character completion rather than the alternate change that happens throughout the film, if that makes a ton of sense. It wasn't a big thing, but more just like he doesn't necessarily have a ton of change from him being an adult to him facing Zod. It's more everything had already happened at that point.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what are your thoughts on the side characters? Let's start with his parents, and then we can go into Lois Lane. What are your thoughts on Jonathan and Martha? It's Martha, right?
Yeah, Martha Kent. Uh best iteration of Jonathan Kent too. I think Jonathan Kent provides one of the best drives for Superman, right? You have all of these, and they do it so well too, in my opinion, with these just brief flashbacks as he's going through his life right now in the current day and reflecting on what what his dad left him with. Right, he has the scene where he saves the kids from the bus, and his dad tells him, "You can't just go saving people." And he's like, "What was I supposed to do? Just let them die? Like I had to do something. I can't like he
Hmm.
can't sit there and just let these kids die, even though these kids were also kids that bullied him." Um, and all his dad says is like, maybe. His dad just doesn't have an answer to it. All his dad knows
Hmm.
is the world would become a very volatile place if they discovered Superman's existence right now. And he's like just telling his son, you need to wait until the right moment. And this becomes massive for Clark, especially after his dad dies. And he's like tells his son, don't like I am willing to die if that means you can keep this a secret for a little bit longer until the time is right. Um, and so you have that weight for Superman. He's searching for his purpose. And there's also the scene in the barn when they're talking about the ship, and he's like, tells him, "You, I have to believe you are sent here for a reason, and even if that takes the rest of my life to figure out what that reason is, you have to figure out what that is." And it's kind of like this idea of once you figure out why you were sent here, then I'm okay with you taking that path, right? Making that decision
Hmm.
for yourself. But he doesn't. He believes innately that uh, Clark was sent there for a reason. Whatever that reason is, he doesn't want him revealing his identity to the world too soon to hinder that. And so, in
Hmm.
Clark's mind, that's what's haunting him. And that's the conversation he has with Lois, too. And he tells her, my dad died to keep this secret safe. I can't have you publishing the story. And she relents. She's like, okay, fine. I won't publish the story. Um, like, or basically tell your story because she'd already published a story about him up in the Arctic. Um, and so once he finally finds the ship, it's like now he is willing to embrace this role, this purpose.
Right, and that's kind of the impetus for him as he's an adult, why he's taking all these odd jobs in random places. There's a sense in which he's searching for that answer that he was left with, because he's given a big question mark when his father dies, and he knows, okay, he respects his father's wishes, right? He doesn't try to save him in the middle of the tornado, right? But then he goes, okay, clearly this was so important to my dad that I know who I am and why I'm doing this, that I should not just be aggressively showing myself to the world. Okay, so then what should I be doing? And his constant searching is why you don't necessarily have the full fleshed character that you have from the start of the new Superman, where he already knows who he is, he already has his job, he already does this and that and all the good stuff at the Daily Planet. He's still trying to figure that out, and so he's a little more cautious about that. And I think it goes back to some of what is driving Jonathan, right? And that understanding that who you are is as important as what you do, right? And there's a certain sense in which it outflows from that. And so if you are going to be someone who's for the right things, you need to be raised in the right way and hold to the right values and know solidly the rock you stand on, versus someone like General Zod, who was raised in a very different environment. And so he has the same powers as Superman, but his inherent drive for utilitarianism and for the survival of the Kryptonian race drives him to commit horrid acts of genocide for the sake of his people. And so it results in two very different outcomes for people who have the same powers. And it's interesting to see that it's like, it's going back to this idea that who you are really matters, which is a fundamental idea around Superman in the components that it's constantly espousing is, okay, if you have all power, who are you? Why do you do the things you do? And does that matter? And the constant discussion around him is, yes, it does matter. And so it's important to be grounded and to understand that fully. And this film does that very well and uses Jonathan Kent as a catalyst for that in Kal-El or Superman's life.
Yeah.
Nice.
Um, as far as Martha Kent goes, I don't think she plays nearly as big of a role as Jonathan Kent does in here. Um, I think she is meant to continue that same vein of thought as Jonathan after he dies in that conversation she has with him in her house after it's broken, and kind of giving him some answers or also allowing him to kind of think through where he's going with this situation, what he's meant to do. Um,
Hmm.
so I think her character's good. I think she just doesn't play as big of a role as Jonathan Kent would. Which is also, I
Sure.
mean, it, Clark Kent at the end of the day has very human elements. And Jor-El even says this, like, I needed you to go to Earth and not know where you came from to learn what it meant to be human. And so it is a very human thing for a male child, a little boy, to look to his dad for all of the answers in life.
Hmm.
And I think Jonathan Kent just provides like a very, very well developed masculine authority figure for him. That
Hmm.
he is both wise and yet humble in the sense that he doesn't have all the answers, and he acknowledges that, and he just tells Clark, "I don't have all the answers. You're going to have to figure some of those out on your own. What I do
Hmm.
know is that taking this action right now just doesn't sit right with me. It's too risky for you."
Hmm.
Um, and there's that scene when he's like, "Can I still just be your son?" Because he tells him you were sitting here for a reason. He's like, "Yes, you can." And he's like telling him, "I don't want this responsibility." And he's like, "I don't blame you. I wouldn't want this responsibility either, but we also don't get to choose necessarily the responsibilities we're placed with." Um, and I think that goes back to the idea of like destiny versus the free will, whereas Zod was given both the responsibility of protecting Krypton, but also the programming. Clark Kent was just given the responsibility without the programming, and so he has to decide how he's going to handle this responsibility, as opposed to Zod, who already has a pre-programmed set of ideas about how to handle it.
Nice. So what are your thoughts on Lois? You think she's a great addition to the Man of Steel?
There's like, okay, I was sitting there watching this, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I think one of the things the new Superman has going for it on this is Lois Lane. This Lois Lane just felt so contrived at certain points. Like the falling in love with Superman was just like I was like, this is so forced. What is going on right now? Yes, she's a redhead, but still. I needed to throw that in there. Um,
Oh my gosh.
it's just like the whole like she's like this ambitious reporter making penis jokes, and then she meets Clark Kent, and all of a sudden she just like tones it down like all the way, and she's like, "You're right.
Mhm.
I love you. I'm gonna kiss you after the fight scene." And then she has like the scene when he's struggling, and she like holds him in her stomach, and I was just like, I don't buy it. I don't buy your character in this film. So I
Yeah.
loved most of the characters in this film. Like even Perry White at the Daily Planet, I liked his character. The villains, the side characters, his parents, both sets of them, I thought they did well. Even the kid, like the kid who was a bully to him when they were younger, and then he's an adult, and like that very brief interaction they get, I think they do well with pretty much all the characters. But Lois Lane was just like I couldn't. It was just like in my gut before I even did the review or like sat down and wrote down my thoughts. I was like, this just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah. Well, you felt like Superman never talked to women, and then he talks to one girl and goes, "Oh shoot, she's hot. I love her."
Bro is a
And
genuine bona fide homeschooler.
yeah, basically. It was a little cringe for sure. I definitely the most unbuyable part. I'm sorry, Amy Adams, you do great in some other films, but in this one, I'm out. We're gonna go for the new Superman on that one.
Yeah, and I mean,
But
I don't
yeah, I
even know if
mean,
it's the actress's fault. It's just the way her
no.
character was written was just so. It was like we need Lois Lane in this movie. Make her fall in love, no matter the cost.
Whatever it takes. Yeah,
Exactly.
100%. It was, and you see that she just gets. everyone just gets way too much buy-in for her being this love interest for Superman way too fast.
Yeah.
Unfortunate, but also it's like it's not the most important part of the film, right? It's a B plot, and you see that in how much time they spend on it and how much it's developed. And I would rather them focus on the primary plot more than the B plot. So
Yeah.
that's
I
why
mean,
this one got a better rating than the other one.
I think it would have been totally fine if they had introduced her character and didn't even really address the romantic relationship that was going to occur later on. Right? They intended to make other movies. They could have developed that later. They could have given like an inkling of it towards the end of the film. But I think that it just felt very forced because it's like they wanted to put everything in there. But when you have a film that is this heavily emphasizing his origin in Krypton and you're spending so much time on that, you don't really have that much time to afford towards this other B plot, which is Lois Lane.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, those are the main points I had. What are your thoughts on the overall ending of this film to end with good messages for the audience? Did you leave it satisfied? What were your all thoughts?
I mean, I was satisfied with this film. This film, best DCEU movie by far. I mean, you've got all the Wonder Woman and Aquaman and Shazam and Black Adam and Batman versus Superman and Justice League, which are all just a bunch of like, what are we even doing right now? But this film felt like it had a lot of direction and purpose, and it was very intentional in the way that they went with it. I absolutely love this iteration of Superman because right we talked about this in both the last Superman podcast when you talked about James Gunn's Superman. We also talked about it in pretty much every single Captain America movie. How do you write a character that is always going to want to do the right thing and has all this power? And Superman is just like Captain America, but exponentially worse because Captain America at least is just a super soldier. He's like a human, faster, tougher, stronger. Superman is just he's a god compared to them, and they refer to him as such. And so, how do you write a character like that compellingly? And I think this film did a great job of doing so. They made his character compelling, interesting, gave him conflict, gave him struggles. They gave him questions that needed to be answered. It was a story about him deciding who he's going to be, and I think they did it really really well. So but I mean, like I said at the beginning, I think this is the best iteration of Superman we've ever gotten on the live screen, if you will. And I think that's one of the primary reasons for it.
Right. Well, especially because you know that the themes that are in this film are a lot of them are the same thing we saw in the latest Superman, where it is about who you are and what it means to have this power and responsibility and growing into the role that's demanded of you and all of that stuff and determining those things. And this film just does it so much better than the new one
Yeah.
that there's a reason that both of us gave it the rating that it got today. So for sure, a fair comparison. What are
I
your
mean,
thoughts on the lasting impact?
I think this new Superman, um, it's difficult to say. The new Superman could have more of a lasting impact simply because it's part of a larger universe that does better than the previous one. I think as standalone films, the fact that Man of Steel is so hotly contested right now with the new Superman movie coming out shows just how much of an impact it had. Like this is a film that people genuinely enjoy, will watch over and over again, and will like violently defend in comparison to this new one. And I think when you analyze the plot of this film and the development and the characters, I mean, on top of all that, I think that the music is phenomenal. I really like some of the shots in here. I will say it didn't piss me off until I watched this movie again. But the flight scenes for Superman and James Gunn's movie look so goofy. It looks so stupid. It's like what are we why does it look like that? It's like his fists are so big and he's like all squished together. Whereas this Superman, it felt like Superman. The costume feels like Superman. There's just so many things that I think on top of it having a better story and better character development, I think it visually is just better in terms of so many different elements to it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that also just thematically, the themes they present and the questions they pose actually get some answers and they get drawn out and fleshed out in this plot rather than going, let's ask some questions and then forget we ever asked them about 30 minutes into the film. So,
Hmm. Yeah. No, 100%. They definitely go hard on some of those things. And yes, it's definitely a darker version, but the fact that they're comparing the new Superman to this Superman and not as other iterations of Superman is a sign for the impact that this film at least had in people's eyes when it came out. So,
yeah.
will it continue to? Once again, it depends on if further iterations of Superman in James Gunn's DCU are better or continue to have an impact or at least draw it out in a way that's unique or more fully fleshed than what we've seen. But if the last movie is any indication, I don't think it's going to eclipse the Henry Cavill version, at least by Man of Steel standards. So
Yeah. I will also
that's what you
say,
got.
um, I think it's important, right, with these comic book movies. I alluded to it earlier, right? They have source material. And as someone who's a fan of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and even Marvel movies, I think there is importance to source material. And I think there is something to be said for staying true to that source material. Because, like I said in, I think it was Star Wars Episode 8, why would you make a movie in a universe if you're going to disregard some of those in universe either rules or like defining character traits? I think Man of Steel does a good job of putting their own twist on the character while sticking true to the core of his character, right? You still have like major events like him getting sent to Earth, Krypton blowing up, his dad dying when he's a teenager. These are character defining moments that still stay the same. You still keep his ultimately at the heart of who Superman is, he is still the same person, even if he is a darker iteration of that character. Not going to defend the rest of the movies in this universe, but Man of Steel in a vacuum, I think even though it's darker, he's a character coming into his own. He does have a darker tone to it, but I don't think simply having a darker tone makes it an inherently worse movie. If that's the only defense you have for the new Superman being better, is just that it's brighter, more colorful, and more hopeful, and I felt inspired leaving it. I think you can feel just as inspired leaving Man of Steel as the new Superman, if that's your only argument. Um,
Right.
and I definitely like when I first saw it, I'm like, oh yeah, heck yeah, this is great.
Right. Well, and I also think there's a sense in which the modern Superman films are being given extra weight just because it just came out. And so it's fresh and beautiful in everyone's eyes, and they haven't had a second to sit down and reflect seriously on it and watch this one again and compare them more side by side compared to in the rearview mirror, if you will. And I think that if you give it a little bit of time, people for sure will come down on the Man of Steel side because that's where I'm at when it comes to these films. And I think there's very good reason for
Yeah.
that
Did
statement.
you see HBO released some statistics? I think the viewing of Man of Steel went up by like over 200% since the new Superman came out. So
I
people
didn't see that, but that doesn't surprise me.
are very much comparing the two. So
Great. Love to see that. And that's what we were doing today. So that's the
yeah.
pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.